Hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 308 of the Vinyl Guide, part 2 of our podcast with author, music producer, and former boss of SST Records, Mr. Joe Carducci. Now in the last episode, number 307, we covered a ton of ground with Joe. His books, some stories from his time at SST Records. If you haven't heard it yet, you may want to go back and listen to episode 307 before pressing on here with number 308. Now today we have even more SST and music stories, some perspective and more from Joe. He's an absolutely tremendous author. Joe has written several books which, in my opinion, belong in every music nerd's bookshelf, like Rockin' the Pop Narcotic, Enter Naomi, Stone Mail, and more. And also Joe's new book, Western Stories, is available now. Get it from whatever bookstore you can. He doesn't do digital, only paper and ink, but you can certainly get one shipped to you. Ask your local bookshop for Joe Carducci books, or Google up a shop like Night Heron Books at nightheronbooks.com. They will get one to you no matter where you are in the world. And hey, even though this is the final part of the interview, part 2 of 2, there is an extended conversation with Joe, about 30-40 minutes extra, that can only be heard at patreon.com/vinylguide. Go up there now, help support our show, get access to extended interviews, early access to episodes, and of course you also get that warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting our show. Whether it's $5 or $10 or whatever you can each month, it helps keep me in burritos, helps keep me churning out these episodes, so please make it happen. 'Tis the season. It's a great holiday gift for me. Join us at patreon.com/vinylguide, where you get to hear the rest of the show. And finally, if you're a fan of punk and SST Records, we have a heap of other episodes of the Vinyl Guide, interviews ready for you to enjoy anytime. Like episode 304 with Kira Rossler, formerly of Black Flag, episode 301 with Amel and the Sniffers, the only interview with all 4 members of the band. That's episode 301 of the Vinyl Guide. Keith Morris of Black Flag, Circle Jerks, and Off, episode 290 of the Vinyl Guide. Former U.S. presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke on his love for punk and SST Records, episode 238 of the Vinyl Guide. Mike Watt, Chuck Dukowski, Henry Rollins, Spot the Engineer, heaps more interviews, all available. Subscribe to the Vinyl Guide podcast. All of these episodes and interviews are freely available for you to enjoy anytime. And with that, let's get into part 2 of our interview with Mr. Joe Carducci. No limits. In your book, again, this is a very old quote from the early 90s. Watch, and this is talking about Black Flag, watch and wait for a middle period 5-piece studio demo recorded illegally under the threat of imprisonment in 1982. Now, those recordings are all over YouTube. I've even seen some vinyl bootleg pressings come out. Any idea how that recording got bootlegged?
Well, this came out. Chuck told me Greg thought I had bootlegged it because I put that in the book, but I didn't bootleg it. I just had a cassette of it, and they didn't want it out, so I didn't even make copies for people like Jack Brewer, who heard it when I walked in. He walked into SST, and it just had this animal ferocity. It wasn't done to multi-track, so it's not mixable. But somebody, Henry made copies for people, I assume, and I don't know. Greg was not as Nixon as he thought he was. About stuff they didn't want people talking about. And that's, he started talking to Gem Records about the Charles Manson album, and next thing you know, in a couple days, it was on News Radio 78 in L.A. Not 78, but 1170 KNX, and Black Flag is putting out a new Charles Manson album on their SST label. Charles Manson makes news in L.A. still, and that was not good because we were doing a record, but in the end we didn't do it. But it was hard to keep a secret when the one thing we regretted was there was this rumor it must have been in '82 Dez was in the band, but he was going to leave the band, and somehow that got translated as rumor that people were calling from the East Coast asking, we heard Dez Cadena had died of a drug overdose, and we just thought that's ridiculous, and in retrospect we should have confirmed that he had died just to see as a prank. He's still alive, and so I think we could have alerted the family and not alarmed anybody important, but it would have been fun because the media was such. God, they were so stupid back then. Even the nominal rock and roll media was just out to lunch.
If you had done that, it would have been so embedded in fact. Even to this day, he'd still be denying his death.
I know. Well, I mean, they knew. I guess they knew he smoked pot, and no one else in Black Flag did at that point. And I don't know. I don't know what the source of it was anymore. But we denied it. We said we just saw him. So before we even thought about, we could use this. I mean, that's where Greg was a little bit. He was a little bit slow to respond if you asked him a question, and I think it was because he really was a genius, and he was weighing everything.
He'd miss the lightning sometimes.
Yeah, well, I wasn't thinking like that, and so I just said, no, he's alive. Mm-hmm. I just saw him, but our lawyer, when we were, I had to explain, some of the mechanics of why we were putting out the Everything Went Black album when Black Flag was still under contract with Unicorn. They told us we could, but we didn't get it on paper. So then when they notified that they were leaving Unicorn for cause, then they sued us to stop Everything Went Black, and so I had to go on court, and the lawyer explained the situation, which was that Chuck would kind of ramble on the witness stand, and Greg would pause and think, and it looked to them like the judge would think he's thinking of a lie, to say. Right. And so they were explaining to me that they preferred that I not do either of those things, Mm-hmm. And I'd never been on the witness stand before, and I made a mistake. We just weren't thinking fast enough. But we had Kim Fowley's lawyer, so we were loaded for bear ourselves, and sooner or later we pulled a magic act.
Yeah, because Billy was on the show, and he shared that everyone got a crash course in paralegal.
Yeah, I think I listened to that, and Milo. I think more recently, I have heard some of your interviews, and Bill especially. Bill and Greg would keep going to the lawyers and read case history after case history, trying to figure out, what their options were, and that saved the billing money because our lawyers would have to read that otherwise.
Sure.
And so they were very good to us, the lawyers, and in the end, Greg called me and explained that the structure of Unicorn was several corporations, and they suspected that when they filed for bankruptcy for the studio, that checks that were written to the studio might not be put into that bankruptcy. It might be put into the account that was not bankrupt, the corporation that was not bankrupt. And sure enough, they did that, and so I called Rough Trade, and Ann up at Rough Trade was the accountant, and I knew her from when I was at Systematic, and she found the canceled check so they could tell which account the check had gone, and these were damaged albums they were buying from Unicorn and paying Unicorn, and so that canceled check was, not canceled, but it was endorsed to the wrong company, so that's bankruptcy fraud. So Unicorn's Chapter 11 was converted to Chapter 7 for all of the corporations involved, and that freed Black Flag overnight in an instant. And then we went to town with getting damaged, the TV Party back in print, and the Everything Went Black came out, and they were free to do My War and Slip It In.
Right, and they had this whole backlog of recordings. During this court drama, as the recordings of My War and Slip It In, I think everything was being done very much under the radar. Were those albums largely compiled and waiting for a moment in which they could be released?
Well, Greg is so particular that every change in the band meant almost going back to zero in arrangements and practices. So when Dez leaves, there's no second guitar. Nobody is going to replace him. They're just back to a four-piece, and the My War that comes out is missing the Dez part, And I know Chuck didn't like that because he heard that in the song, even though he wasn't in the band anymore. And that's where that five-piece demo has Chuck Biscuits and Dez in it, and you can hear that original, arrangement. And so it struck us as kind of naked sounding, My War. And Greg is playing the bass with Bill and then adding his guitar later. And, the people like the album, and but, we knew those songs with the five-piece, the people around the band. They weren't playing those songs live very often, but they were practicing them and occasionally doing some of them in sound checks for the gigs. They started guarding those songs so that, the bands that were influenced by Black Flag were not going to be able to be influenced by those new songs until they were released. And that was a major concern at a certain point. But yeah, it's all backed up. Slip It In was played as an instrumental at gigs in the sound checks. For such a long time, I related to it like it was Obliteration, an instrumental. And I knew he was working on lyrics, and even before I heard the lyrics, I thought, hey, you should just keep this as an instrumental. It's, I had heard the basic tracks for TV Party, and it seemed to me that the vocal arrangement with all the TV shows and the choruses, it almost has a soccer chant chorus, which, I always hated that arrangement pattern. I related it to the British style of punk rock, and I didn't like it. Usually it'd be the song title would be chanted, by a chorus of people who couldn't sing. And it just was boorish, and when you got musicianship like in Black Flag, it's a different thing. You're covering up stuff that's really well played and thought out. And TV Party without the vocals, or certainly without the extra vocals, is a different song. And I missed, you don't hear the hook anymore when you listen, because the vocal business, now, I don't mean Henry singing the lyric, I mean the chorus and the extra voices that do the TV shows and everything. That's all in the way. And I always remembered that riff got lost in the final mix of both versions of it. And I thought Slip It In is going to get lost, and I think it is, partly because the lyric is so bizarre It's you can't ignore it. And then Davo is whatever he's doing. He's maybe Suzanne is on the album too. I forget.
Were you still at SST while these records were being put out? Slip It In and My War? Okay.
Yeah. I was there throughout, until March 86. And so those records are all out, but Black Flag is touring into the end of the summer, I think, into June, I think, June 86. So I leave the label, and they're still on tour, and Greg comes back and pretty much takes over for me. And Richard Ford, who had been the guitarist in SWA, he left music he wanted to do the record label, so I basically trained him to do the manufacturing production stuff.
So while these records are being put together, did you voice or did anyone voice their opinions on the mixes and Greg just didn't want to hear it? Or was all that done out of everyone's view and everyone just heard the final result once the recordings were pressed?
Well, I think he and Bill Stevenson did a lot of that together. I'd already stopped. I mean, I had been, my judgment was that I had been too close to the band because I'm not their manager and I'm not in the band, and my opinions were making it harder to just, work on the record label side of things. So I stopped having an opinion on what they were doing, and I wish I'd gone over there and watched them practice more often, but it just got to be too tense and it wasn't productive. So we had plenty to do, Mugger and myself, and then we got Ray Farrell and other employees to do, stuff, and so we could actually plan out what we were releasing and who was touring and what kind of promotion to do. And so it was becoming a more involved business. And I think Bill was learning engineering and Greg was learning engineering from Spot and then from Dave Tarling, who had come back into the picture. He was the producer of Nervous Breakdown because Spot had worked under Dave Tarling at Media Art Studio, and Tarling went into hard rock, so he was producing and managing Wasp and some other bands.
So you were overseeing the catalog, the label. You were aware that going into 1984, we've got 3 album packages: My War, Slip It In, and Family Man. You were kind of running the logistics on those as well? Well,
I put the My War and Slip It In albums through the production cycle. Once the records, I don't mean the producing the sound in the studio. I mean producing the covers and the posters and cutting the lacquers. Spot worked on the cut. He went to the mastering lab, K-Disc, for anything he worked on as a producer engineer. So he did My War and Slip It In. I think Slip It In is the best sounding record because Kira joined the band. So it's a real band. It's not Greg playing bass, and then adding guitar later. And it's well produced and well played and probably the best sounding of the band after the 5-piece. And then they wanted to bring their artwork into Global, which is where Black Flag lived and where they practiced. And so I think Davo and Bill kind of put together the Loose Nut and the In My Head artwork, working with Raymond stuff. They just handed it to me when they were done with it, and then I put it to the printer and the rest of it.
Now the catalogs, the SST flyers and things that went into the records at that time, what was the process for that?
Well, I did those until I probably I probably did them until 85. And it was just a matter of going to the typesetter in Torrance and that we used and getting album covers photographed and reduced down to black and white for the ads. And we did those in Gardena at a place. And, these were places that Black Flag had used when they were doing stuff before I was there. And they were in Hermosa and Torrance. And we just reconnected with those companies once we moved back down to Redondo Beach in 82.
So you'd have a record coming out. You knew you're going to make 10,000 of them. You would just get 10,000 flyers, take those down to Rainbow Records, and they would slip them in? Is that, pardon the pun, but is that how it worked?
Yeah. Well, Verco was where most of them got done and the pressings. And we went up. With everything went black, we were trying to save some money, so they suggested we come up there and do the stickering and we did the stickering on the Damaged album over the MCA. So we did that kind of stuff to save, 3 to 5 to 7 cents a record for insertion, and we did that for Damaged when the sticker went on for MCA, and then we went up again for a couple times for Everything Went Black, because that had a Pettibone poster and a mail order thing and a sticker, a Black Flag sticker. And so we printed those elsewhere and then went up there with a crew in the van, and the covers were all on these racks waiting to have the LPs stuck in the racks, sort of the open end outside. And before that happened, we would stick in all the inserts. Normally, we just shipped up or dropped off. We often drove to the pressing plants, which were in Alhambra, Monterey Park, and then I think in Santa Monica. Bill's Rainbow was in Santa Monica, I believe. So yeah, it was fun to get conversant with all the recording studios, the mastering lab, the James G. Lee processing. That's where the lacquers went to make the stampers. And then the pressing plants were, the album cover printers were a separate company. And then finally the pressing plants. And you got to know these people, fairly well in some cases. And it was, they were in hard times, and most of them didn't survive.
I didn't realize Everything Went Black came with posters and stickers. I don't think I've ever seen or heard of a copy like that.
Well, we did the regular covers first. We probably did 15,000 regular covers, and it's got the. It's actually, I think, a Pettibone. The model for the woman is Simone Signoret, and in the background is this depressed man, and the caption is something like 5 suicide attempts. No, not her boyfriends. And she's grinning, and so that, and then it just has a Black Flag logo and the bars on the poster. And, it's a nicely printed, it's not a flyer, it's a real offset printing on slick paper. And it's folded, it's not a big poster, it's just folded once to fit in there. And then the sticker was, I think, Black Flag, and then it had the Pettibone of the gardening shears that are on the cover of Everything Went Black. So it might also say Everything Went Black on the sticker. And then the mail order catalog, whatever it was at that point, it was like a one sheet. And and then that went together and was slipped into 15,000. Then we got the injunction, so we redid the cover with the name Black Flag removed, or blocked out, and we did maybe 10,000 of those, and then we pressed them and shipped some of them, and then we were stopped, and we had to call them all back, and we got most of them back, and we locked them up, and then when they got free of the injunction, I think, I don't even remember now, if we sold the pressings with the blacked out covers, or we, because now we could use the real covers,
right,
which I think is what we did. But anyway, it's complicated. It's hard to remember all that stuff. You know, you now you're in your 60s and you're thinking, geez, it takes forever to do things. It seems like back then we could do, you know, we had a crisis every week, and we got a lot more done. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm trying to capture these stories, because they're so fascinating, and trying to make sense of it all. Because I've got one of the blacked out covers. So that, it sounds like that's the rarest type. That's the least amount printed.
That's probably true. See, I don't remember if we would have, maybe they didn't, I think we would have run them all, anticipating that we were going to sell them all. Mm-hmm. So what did we do with them when they were enjoined? I think we locked them in a bin that we had out back. We had like a closet we could put a padlock on. But when the injunction ended, what did we do with those? Did we open them up and put the vinyl in the real covers? At this point, I don't remember.
Right. I think there's a German release of everything went black.
That's right. That's right. And I don't think Unicorn even knew that, and we thought, well, they're not going to find out about that, so we didn't even tell them about it in Germany. I mean, they somehow translated Spot's liner notes into German, and I said, "Hey, Spot, check out your German." And I mean, he was full of beach jive and, you know, our kind of lingo, so I don't even know how they did that, but yeah.
Who do you keep in touch with from those SST days?
Spot and Mugger and Ray Farrell and Mike Watt, and on Facebook a lot more. You know, we're Facebook friends with a lot of people from, you know, Saccharin and Greg Norton from Husker, and I'm occasionally in touch with the Meat Puppets, and but I don't go to shows anymore, and so I don't see people very often there. I of course, worked with Bill Stevenson, and we tried to get together last time I was in Wyoming. So we've sort of dropped out of touch a little bit, but I still go into his studio, and he's either there or he's not. You know, like I said, my brother's high school band, Byron Coley put out that record last year, so we mastered that down at the Blasting Room in Fort Collins. But he's got a partner, and he's a little more the hands-on guy. I think you pay extra money for Bill Stevenson if you want him to engineer your album.
Sure.
I mean, they've become, you know, a real anyone who wants to record in a room. Blasting Room is, you know, one of your best options.
Mm-hmm. Were you at SST for the Thirsty and Miserable single?
We'll be back after these messages.
Hey there, I gotta tell you about the Groove Washer. Not because I have to, but because I want to. The Groove Washer is the best record cleaner you can get. And if you have a vinyl collection, you need to keep it clean. Dirt and dust lead to groove wear, which affects the sound and value of your record collection. Use the Groove Washer to clean before each play, and your ears and future pocketbook will thank you. Ask for the Groove Washer by name at your local record store, or go direct to groovewasher.com and use promo code VinylGuide10 at checkout. Groove Washer is a great holiday gift. Why not send one to a friend? groovewasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10. Do it now. And all record nerds want to hear about AudiofileUSA.com, the family-owned and operated online record shop that's been in business over 30 trustworthy years. AudiofileUSA.com only sells excellent and near-mint vinyl records, only in tip-top quality for your turntable. And with over 42,000 titles, you're sure to find a bunch on your want list at AudiofileUSA.com. Audiophile vinyl is not just for the elite. Everyone can enjoy the gold standard of sound at AudiofileUSA.com. Search by title, genre, label, dig and find the deals at AudiofileUSA.com, home of the Holy Grails.
Now we return to the program already in progress.
No limits. Were you at SST for the Thirsty and Miserable single?
Yeah. That was early on. Right after the Damaged album came out, they did that around, I think, their New Year's Eve show to help promote They went on tour to England, and then came back and had a New Year's Eve show at the Olympic Auditorium. And that was a big promotion, and a lot of big bands supported them on the bill. Fear, Suburban Lawns, I think. I mean, I actually, probably not Suburban Lawns at that point. They had done these big shows before with kind of like non-hardcore bands, and maybe the Blasters were on that show, I think. So, an interesting promotion. And so Licorice Pizza, that was a unicorn thing. I designed the record label just because, I don't know, they thought I would do a better job. I just use a typewriter. So it's not much, but it's got the unicorn logo and the SST logo on it.
Do you recall much about the printing and the logistics around that?
Well, that would have gone probably through Verco because, I think Verco did the last 45s, and that's maybe how Greg and Chuck wound up pressing out there. Spot was involved in the technical side of things, too. I know they mastered some of the earliest stuff at Verco, but they weren't a good state-of-the-art mastering lab. They had a good pressman and did good pressings, but they eventually did all the mastering at K-Disc finally. But anyway, so that went up there because once SST was there, then I think they had referred Posh Boy and Slash and Gem and Unicorn were all doing stuff up at Verco, and Verco helped us get loose of Unicorn because Unicorn owed Verco money for the pressings of Damaged and some of their other stuff, and they wouldn't settle with them. So that hung over their bankruptcy and helped us out on that level.
At any point, did SST just blow out, discount a bunch of product just to generate cash flow?
Not while I was there. Mm-hmm. We didn't, we got into bigger distributors, and I remember Lakeside, it was a one-stop in Cleveland, and we'd never dealt with a one-stop before, and they asked for 10% free goods. And I go, what are free goods? And he goes, well, when we order records, they give us 10% free goods, and that, I don't know what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give you better placement or grease the wheels. And then, Capitol got in trouble for doing that because they didn't pay royalties to the Beatles or the Beach Boys for those 10%.
Right.
And pretty soon that 10% grew, I think, and they really got reamed by the Beach Boys in court at some point because I think they were selling records off the books as part of this free goods thing. And, that's the old mob. That's why everybody left that level of independent, promotion and distribution is because it wasn't, you say what you want about the Suits, but they aren't the mafia.
And that's up and above the 30% breakage fees.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Who knows? I mean, we were pretty naive and we were honest. So as far as I know, I never, we didn't discount anything. We were trying to gouge people so we could survive. You were selling vinyl for $4. When you got to an $8.98 list price at some point in '84, maybe we were asking $4.15 an album from distributors, and nobody got a discount on that. And it was hard to hard to make any money.
At any point, are you aware of any overages that were made either by any other labels or any other entities to purchase or absorb SST?
No, I mean, you know, we got a call from Twin Tone once because, you know, they were having this, they suspected this problem, which we all knew. The distributors we dealt with, you know, Dutch East and Important and Green World and Gem, were all starting their own labels, Bomp, you know, all of the, I guess you'd say, punk era independent distributors and importers. Some of them were more importers than, you know, real distributors, but they came to be our distributors when we, you know, got to where we had records they cared about. And, you know, and they were starting their own labels and signing up, say, an imitation Black Flag and an imitation Minutemen and an imitation Meat Puppets. You know, that's how I sort of saw it. They looked at what was selling in independent stores, Joy Division, you know, there were a million Joy Division imitators, and they were mostly terrible bands, you know, B grade, and you know, maybe the bands didn't have a spot to look out for them. Maybe the you know, those labels were run by somebody who turned them into an imitator. You know, I don't know. I don't know. One thing that was the secret of SST was that Spot didn't remake anybody, and he took grief later on, maybe from Husker Du primarily, or the Minutemen, by, you know, not remaking them. Then they're, of course, they're unhappy with how their record sounds. That's the nature of a musician. I was, you know, I was glad to see Greg Norton posted at some point, you know, on Facebook about the Meat Puppets Up on the Sun, and, you know, the thread was about Up on the Sun, and he mentioned that Grant and Bob were really surprised and shocked, you know, at how great the Meat Puppets Up on the Sun sounded. And I just said, I bet they were, you know, and he, you know, he liked my comment and left it at that. But I know that they left SST blaming Spot, and then, you know, none of their other records sound any good at all, really. And they get worse and worse on Warner Brothers. I don't know why. I wasn't there, but, you know, no one wants to listen to those records. People want to listen to metal, you know, metal Zen Arcade, Metal Circus, and New Day Rising, maybe, even though that's kind of a, you know, a bollocksed up production, but you know, that was a new studio, and they you know, they thought when I said, you know, we'd fly Spot there, that they had to take Spot, you know, and get him involved. And you know, it was a new studio, and they were part owners or something. So you know, they kind of Husker Du burnt all their bridges in Minneapolis as this, you know, snotty punk rock hardcore band. And then they wanted to come back as, you know, victorious. And but before they did that on New Day Rising, recording in Minneapolis, they were very easy to work with in LA, and you know, they liked being on SST, and they liked working with Spot, and they liked, you know, working with me on releasing the records, and they made a lot of use of it because they were doing records quickly and, you know, more than one a year, which the Minutemen did. The Minutemen, you know, the Minutemen didn't tour quick enough. You know, they were like the Descendants. It took them a while somebody in the band had a job and they couldn't leave, and eventually they could tour, and then people could see how great the band was.
I had Spot on the show a while back, and I asked him about his production style and his sonic style. And I don't know if he was just very humble about it, but he didn't offer a whole lot about what made his production style different. Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I was explaining it somewhere, I think on Facebook, in fact, trying to clarify something maybe on the SST group. Spot came to punk rock from jazz, and he was writing about jazz, he was playing jazz, and he was recording jazz at the studio when he ran into Greg and got to know those guys. And before he seconded on Nervous Breakdown, I think he seconded on a bunch of Danger House stuff that was done there. And he wouldn't say he engineered it, but he was the tape operator or some such, And but when he was your engineer producer, he was the engineer, and he figured you knew what you were doing, and so he didn't redo anything. He if there was a sonic problem, then he would talk about the EQ of the guitar or the EQ of the bass. But basically, he treated the bands like they knew what they were doing, and if the drums were ringing or something, he would move the mics and do. So he was trying to get the best sound of the live presentation the band was doing, but he didn't remake anyone's sound, and that's what's kind of funny because, again, the bands grow up. They want to make some money. If major labels start sniffing around, then they want someone to remake their sound.
Right.
Something they would have throttled you for 2 years ago. Suddenly, they're complaining that you didn't do it. And so anyway, I don't think any of it was that overt, but, there's no consistency in the lifespan of a band. That the needs change. And Spot was interested in the moment in time that these bands existed. And Greg and Chuck, through Overkill and the Stains and, bands that they really couldn't afford to record, and they wanted to record them while they were good, The Chiefs were a band that was from, I think, Gardena, and they moved to Hollywood and broke up, and they were one of these South Bay bands that was just an amazing phenomenon. I mean, there's something about the proximity to the Long Beach Sports Arena and the Santa Monica Civic and the Forum, St. Vitus. They went to all of these arena shows as kids. They sort of grew up on that stuff. Then the Fleetwood opens, and they could see Patti Smith and the Germs and Hollywood bands that go up to Hollywood. So there was some magic thing about the South Bay, and those bands played better. They practiced more. I don't know what it was. They wrote songs. It's almost they do a lot of things better than the bands in Hollywood or Orange County or and yet the largeness of a city that's spread out with scenes that are geographically isolated, all of that contributed to how good everything was in that period. Even the bands we kind of weren't that interested, when you go back and listen to them, the stuff sounds really good. Bands that are not just, at the time we thought they were just hardcore bands, and it's funny how much better they are sounding, now because of, I guess, the general deterioration of stuff. Or, people, the British style was always there to kind of, you relax your aggression of your presentation of rock music. You can always relax into something like how The Cure or Joy Division or, these sort of strumming strumming bands. It's electric guitar, but it's just strumming. It's not really, it's not really played music.
Joe, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much. Before you go, I'm really keen to get your opinion on your perspective of the vinyl revival of the last 10 years or so. People are going back to that physical media format. Is that something you understand or appreciate or question or have an opinion on?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and I hope that a 7-inch 45 is still a viable way for a new band to announce itself. But and then you do your album. But something about it seems like, I was always a little bit allergic to the collector strain of, the material I dealt with at Systematic and SST later. The thing that, on one hand, that Stiff did with color vinyl and Oops, we assembled the sleeve inside out on 5,000 Elvis Costello singles, or whatever scam they were doing. It was kind of funny, but to me, you want to focus on reaching people through the radio, and so because kids in those days listened to music first on the radio, and then they didn't go to gigs at first, so it always seemed like it wasn't culturally productive to be issuing collector's items and limited editions. And so, vinyl, is kind of like on ice now. They're collector's objects. And, and something tells me that no matter what you're doing, even if you're playing live, the PA is digital. And there's some kind of prophylactic digital condom, between the music of the instrument itself and the player playing and your ear. And that's not what people heard when they were listening to the Jimi Hendrix Experience or The Who or Black Flag. There's something about the old analog, maybe it's just, we made it expressive, even though it was electronic. My friend Lightborn stopped listening to the electric guitar because he wanted to hear that pure music, the musician, what he could do on the strings. Mm-hmm. And he thought the amplification made it easier to play the guitar. And you didn't have to be as good. You didn't have to have complete control over the neck and the strike of the strings. And he's right, but there's something about the electric instruments through an amplifier, and then you're in a studio and you're hearing it through these great speakers, and sometimes you want to just you don't want to put it to tape. You just want to hear that. Mm-hmm. You want to hear the depth of what Dave Chandler can sound like through a Marshall amp. Mm-hmm. And you just want to not put it to tape.
I've got a friend of mine that's a toy collector, and a couple decades ago, Western toys were the craze. Howdy Doody and Roy Rogers, those sort of things. Extremely popular. Yeah. Over the last couple decades, the prices of those have really plummeted because the people who appreciated those, the people who have those wonderful memories of those toys are passing. So now it's kind of relegated to junk. And I'm wondering if that's something that's happening with vinyl right now. There's people, and I'm putting myself in that category. We grew up with music, with records. Yeah. There's a peacefulness. There's wonderful memories associated with it. We now have the money to kind of recapture some of those. Yeah. in 10, 20 years, are all the records that we have going to be the same as those Western toys are now?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still writing Westerns, and they're just, period stories. But I notice, I think I listened years ago, or I don't know when you did it, but you or your website, your podcast did John Tefteller.
Oh, yeah.
And my friend Lightborn was in touch with him quite a bit, and really looked forward to his letters and stuff. And those guys with the 78s, I mean, they're the ones who, are the earliest. They have the earliest medium. Maybe the wax cylinders go a little before that, but the 78 collectors are and David told me that I can't even remember his name. The guy on the East Coast, you probably know him. His thinking was that the first generation who bought records were affected by the records and began to change how they played music, because what was on the record was so formally impressive that it changed what they were doing, with their own playing. Mm-hmm. And so that guy's theory is that you really only want to listen to stuff recorded before 1930, because everything after 1930 is in a feedback loop with the first records, and that's impure, from a pure folk. And you can see intellectually that's probably true, but you don't want to give up Jimi Hendrix, and you don't want to give up, the Carter brothers, or a bunch of stuff that came well after that, Elvis Presley. But yeah, it's sort of like there's a point at which vinyl today is no longer a medium; it's a art object, and worse than that, it's maybe a investment. Mm-hmm. And when people were getting rid of their vinyl, and I was researching Rockin' the Pop Narcotic, I was buying the crappiest copies of records, so that I only paid $1 or $2 and bought more widely of stuff I needed to know about and hadn't heard, and I could buy more of them, instead of trying to buy the mint copy, which already were $10 or $20. That seemed too high to me. Mm-hmm. I used to switch the 50-cent closeouts of the worst garbage in Woolworths. I used to peel off the 50-cent sticker and put it on the $1.99 sticker that they wanted for the remaindered Paul Revere and the Raiders albums, and get them at a bargain. So I never had a lot of spending money. So I never, I know how people buy records, and they're $30 now. That's just not my language of vinyl.
Well, that's $30 is kind of the low end of the spectrum. Some of those records you were talking about, Misfits records, Minor Threat records, going for thousands.
Well, yeah, that's the original pressings. I mean, the new stuff that you would see at Barnes & Noble, that's like the list price of $29 or $35 maybe. They're double albums. Mm-hmm. So they're mastered better, but there's still digital involved in the pressings. They're not. I don't know if they can do a fully analog mastering anymore.
Yeah, only someone like maybe Jack White that spends crazy money keeping these sort of electronics,
right, the studio
up and functional. But when you hear of some of these records, even Black Flag records, that you used to have boxes for of $7, now going for $600-$700 or more. Do you have an opinion on what's happening there?
Well, I've been selling off, not myself, but I've been selling off some of my English stuff, and My friend Joe Pope, who used to be an Angst on SST and wound up running Systematic after I left, he's buys and sells vinyl, and he's an expert on it. So he sold one of my Australian bands, the Victims 45.
Ooh,
they were from Perth.
Perth, yeah.
They were from Perth, yeah. And he got me $1,500 for that 7-inch, and I got 2 of them, so I still have it. But not all of them are worth 15. But if I was a millionaire, I would collect surf singles and Jamaican 45s. Up until 82. I think I do like I do like the purity of the junk culture of my youth, I suppose. Not that I knew reggae when it was happening. I learned about it at Systematic from the Rough Trade people and my partner Peter at Systematic. They weren't really into punk rock. They were into reggae. So I did manage to learn a little bit about it from them.
Well, Joe, again, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I do appreciate it.
Great talking to you, Nate. I think I've probably heard more of your podcast than I know, because they come up once in a while on Facebook, and I don't always know what I'm listening to or where it came from. But it's impressive what you've done there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, look, I'm just following my muse, and I suppose for someone like yourself who was around in that industry, around those folks at that pivotal time, it's almost like hearing a family reunion, being a fly on the wall and hearing some of these stories of these times there where you were actually present. So I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I think this is another great addition to that catalog.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I had the occasion, sad occasion, to write a memoir, and the Enter Naomi book is, a memoir of SST as well as our music photographer, Naomi Peterson. And, there's more of what I'm talking to you about SST in that book than in Rock and the Pop Narcotic. But, those are the 2 books on music that I wrote.
Yeah, and I'm going to be putting these links in the episode page where people can pick up copies. They're not available digitally, and I haven't got a copy of Enter Naomi, but I am going to order it. I absolutely love Rock and the Pop Narcotic. A friend of mine here in Australia had a copy of that and Life Against Dementia, which I'm very eager to check out as well. Your writing style is wonderful. You're one of the few artists that I read multiple times.
I do work on the books quite a bit. I think in my film book, Stone Mail is probably the most ambitious, and everything I learned by messing up on the other books, I spent longer on that, and the design is nice, and if you're into film, that's probably what I've done best. It's really difficult because, of course, I'm not getting an advance from a publisher, and they would want the wrong kind of book, and if there's a business run worse than the record industry, it's the book publishing industry. And then you talk to Raymond Pettibone, and he'll tell you the art business is worse than the record business, is what he'll say. So where do you go? I guess we can work at Walmart or Amazon.
Yeah, none of it would seem right without the sort of chaos in our lives. I'd love to have another conversation with you about silent movies. I spent a lot of my life chasing that muse as well. I'm a big Eric von Stroheim fan.
Can you give me a mailing address? I'll send you the film book because you're probably not going to order the film book, but let me see what it costs to send the stuff, and I'll let you know what's coming.
But let me pay for them, please. I'll buy them. I want to support the arts. It's very important for me.
Well, I'll give you the discount then, and give me an address, and
I will flick you that again. Thank you so much for spending so much time. I do appreciate that, and hopefully we'll talk again.
Yeah, good talking to you.
Okay, cheers, man.
Bye-bye.
Well, there we go. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming by the show. It's been an absolute honor to have you here. You're welcome back anytime. Everyone, please buy Joe's books. They're great. I always enjoy reading his words. Google up a local bookshop that has Joe's books. Western Stories is the new one, so get that along with all the others. And that is it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate all you people out there who are sharing these episodes and leaving us positive reviews. That is always so helpful. Please continue doing that. Also help show your friends, especially your record nerd buddies who aren't great with technology, how to get the Vinyl Guide podcast on the smartphone of theirs. It's not easy to subscribe to a podcast. It's kind of an abstract thing to some people. So if your record nerd buddies aren't listening to the show, ask them and show them how to do it. It's that easy and it's so appreciated. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Send your thoughts to Nate at thevinylguide.com or follow or tag us on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. Until next time, keep spinning.